How are you?
I'm fine. Yeah, just fine, really. Thanks.
Good, good.
Maybe I was on the side rather than up and down.
I don't really mind, to be honest. Do we mind about the picture? I don't think
No.
we do. No. So you've had you've been singing quite a while now. You might say. You had what I suppose some might say is a sort of um, quite a classic music education in a way for a type of singer. In that you were a chorister at New College, and then a choral scholar at King's, with presumably just a few years off in the middle for good behaviour. Um, so, how do you think that particular journey, that part of your musical education, sort of influenced you as a singer, and even also influenced your voice? Because it's a very certain type of singing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel in some ways awkward about my sort of background because I feel a bit of a fraud because I haven't been to music college. But never mind. I'll draw a veil over that. And you're right. I'm not alone. There are other people who've had the same sort of background, and I think it is a good training. Actually, I'm. I think as a chorister, I think the main thing you learn is how to read music quickly and get on with performing every day. Without worrying about whether you're really ready for it. You've just got to get on and do the job, and that actually is, as you'll know very well, a very good training for the real world, if only it weren't. But unfortunately, that is what life is quite often like. And I suppose it's interesting you say about whether that training has turned me into the singer that I am. It's a bit of a question, isn't it, whether the singer chooses the role or the role chooses the singer, if you see what I mean. And I'm not wholly convinced that in terms of technique and the art of singing, that there are so very many different kind of types of singer. But you're right. I've certainly after college days, I specialized, if you like, in early music and in consort singing for quite a little while until, well, probably for 10 years after we were at college together. And and I loved that. But then when I was about 30, I just started singing more solo music, really. And I almost stopped singing in consorts. And it's the one thing I miss hugely because I just love the music.
Mm.
And it's been one of the things I've been able to do during this dreaded lockdown is get together with a few people and sing some, Renaissance polyphony or something like that. It's such a joy to do. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, how do singers discover where they feel comfortable? It's a fascinating question, isn't it?
It is a big question. As I remember, uh, I would say that looking back and with the obviously the benefit of hindsight, it's tricky to sort of discern. But I would say that you were definitely the singer in the 3 years I was at King's. You were the only singer that I would definitely have said this is someone who could have a solo career. There's not that there weren't good singers at that time. There were some good singers, but that's quite a different thing. And then obviously you had the whole sort of sojourn into medicine and stuff. But then I wonder if that actually, you seem to produce your voice quite naturally then. And I know that that's a sort of double-edged sword when people say, "Oh, voices are just, you sing so naturally." So, and that's just terrible, terrible thing for someone to say. But it did seem to be something that you, or even if we were doing, a solo in some Magnificat, that you were able to deliver that in a way. You had a connection with the words, I think, as well. And I wonder if that, after leaving King's, that time really helped you to as a person and as a singer, and then gave you that chance to say, do I want to be a doctor or do I want to be a singer?
What makes a solo singer? I don't think there's anything particularly technical that is different from being a soloist to being a consort singer. I wouldn't say there was. But singing in a choir, you just need to be able to produce the sound in the right way. What I feel makes a solo actually an attribute singer is individuality of approach and a kind of the actual delivery to the moment of performance. And I think that is something that I recognize in other singers, and certainly when I'm teaching, is something I'm always on the lookout for people to develop, is the kind of skill to look beyond the notes and the words, and to think, what am I really trying to say to these people who are in front of me and who've come to hear the concert? Why are we all gathered together? And I hope that is something that I've got a little bit better at over the years. I don't know. It's interesting that as my years have gone on, I've gone more and more into doing chamber music, doing recital work, which is, almost the epitome of that, because there's just nothing. And I don't know, you've done recitals, and they can be the most terrifying thing, because there's just nothing there. There's no orchestra. There's nothing between you, and then you've got to sing for an hour and a half by heart. It's a nightmare. But anyway, I think that sort of connection, making sure that that you're actually trying to make the poem make sense to people in the hall, is something I enjoy doing more and more, actually.
Yeah. But relatively, it's very interesting to say, I think relatively few of the consort singers or singers who specialize in that work and in other sort of the sort of pool, if you like, of the singers who do that and all the other sort of professional choir work, relatively few of them nevertheless become soloists.
I think that's true, because there's a very special skill, which is the ability to combine with a lot of other people. And that is a real skill, which perhaps I'm not very good at. And I think, you really don't want a whole heap of individuals sort of bumping into each other in a choir or a consort. You want the whole group of people to sound as one. You want them to sound as one, enunciating the text and making the work make sense. But you don't want to hear, the second tenor sticking out all the time, and that rather wobbly soprano. That won't do. Whereas as a soloist, those little sort of quirks of individuality are quite useful, I think.
Yeah, sure. That's interesting. So, I mean, coming on to Bach, because it seems sort of quite a natural thing to ask about. If we've got what do you think makes a good singer of Bach? Is that much the same as you were saying about the use of the text and that sort of thing? And particularly, I suppose, a big question would be, how different is the approach needed to sing the evangelist as opposed to sing the arias in Bach?
Gosh, you're very good at questions, David. It's fascinating, and I've thought about it a lot. I'm so lucky, because I've been able to perform a lot of Bach one way or another, and I suppose from our time at college, and ever since I was a little boy, really, I've been singing the Passions, and so I get to know the story very well. But I think for me, doing Bach, where I really sort of had my eyes opened, was with John Eliot Gardner doing the Bach Cantata Pilgrimage project in the year 2000. I don't know if you know exactly what that was. It was a totally bananas project, but he had this idea to perform all of Bach's extant sacred cantatas within a year on the day for which they were composed. And basically, there's a lot of them. There's about 200. And so, each week we would be doing 4 or 5 cantatas. And, each of them is tricky, and most of them are unknown. But what I was so struck by, two things. The first is probably that's how people had to cope with Bach in Bach's day. He would turn up and say, oh, here's next week's music, off you go. And they'd have to get it ready by Sunday. You know, it wasn't, they wouldn't have had months and months and months to mug it up. But also that in those, whatever it is, 200 cantatas, I don't think we discovered a dud one, which is absolutely extraordinary. If you think of the rate of composition and the kind of way that sorry, I'm slightly veering off your question. I will. If you think, and also we've got about 200 cantatas that are remaining to us now. That's probably a third, a quarter of what he wrote. And, you know, that is a lot of notes and a lot of effort. And I suppose it may be that the best ones survive. That tends to be the case, doesn't it? But yeah, that year, which, good Lord, that's 20 years ago, isn't it now? That is shocking. Yeah, I'm not that old, really. Opened my eyes to what it was about, because I had always been brought up on this orthodoxy that Bach was very difficult to sing and that he was an instrumental writer for voices. And of course, doing it week after week after week after week after week, we got into a kind of, I think, a kind of understanding of how to approach it and slightly what to expect. If you really get to know the work of a composer, you recognize where the music's likely to go. Not that everything was the same by any means. And of course, you know, as a non-native German speaker, I was slightly hampered by that. But I was very struck by more and more how I felt the vocal music was so well written for the voice. The only thing that really troubled all of us, really, I think, was the sense that some of the phrases were very long and that one needed to breathe. But as soon as you acknowledged that and said, I'm going to breathe then, that was all right. And as soon as you gave yourself that little bit of permission, it was fine. And I think such a lot of that music is kind of virtuosic in a kind of soloistic sense, I think. And of course, probably, it's a bit of a contentious point, but probably most of the choral writing in all those cantatas was designed for just 4 singers, SATB, or 5 if there's split parts. But so it's 1 to a part all the time. And therefore that kind of individuality that we were talking about just a moment ago is, you know, absolutely fine. And I think John Eliot was quite good at wanting a bit of individuality. Yeah.
It must have been the most extraordinary year. I mean, there were 3 things, 3 questions that probably come to mind. First of all, given the sort of the struggles that a lot of schools are having in actually teaching kids about any sort of music, why would you say Bach then is a great composer? What is it that marks him out as a great composer?
Well, yeah, you're right to talk about education, David. Oh, golly, it's a shocker. I mean, you know, music has fallen out of the primary. I won't get on my high horse, but well, yeah, why is Bach a great composer? I suppose in a nutshell, it's that he's able to combine great artistry, in other words, being able to, you know, fit together things in a very clever and very a way that works. So a real understanding of the actual craft of writing music so he combines that with a huge humanity and something that just touches your heart if you're prepared to open up a bit to his music. And, you know, lots of people do that, of course they do, but I think time and time again we come back to his music and think there's just something extra special about this. And what's interesting is that you and I, our modern people, are not the first to notice this. ever since Bach's day, people have gone back to his music time and time again. I've been doing quite a bit of research on Robert Schumann recently, and he was a total nut about Bach. You know, he just spent hours every day working out why these things work. And obviously he was a great pianist, Schumann, and he got to know the 48 Preludes and Fugues so well. And I just think that kind of the ability to combine the craft, the art, with huge humanity is what does it for me.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that is very interesting. And I think the humanity is an enormously big thing. I mean, personally, I think that I learnt to understand Bach better but it took me quite a lot of time. He wasn't a composer that I went immediately and go, I love Bach, you know. It's sort of, and there were quite a few that I did because I was playing quite young. But I wonder if that is one of the things where you have to stick at it, and
Yeah,
that's not a modern trait necessarily, perhaps.
no, I think that's true. And you know, we've all found this, that you go back and back to it and get more and more out of it, which can't be said for every piece of music. Some things are very attractive to begin with, and you hear them for the 14th time and wish it were time to go to the pub. Just one other tiny thing. It's quite tricky. You have to be on top of your game to do it well. And I think, again, maybe that's not such a kind of modern zeitgeist thing, but it's not something you can just pick up and do. It demands work to get it right and to feel comfortable with singing or playing it. And I think that's such a valuable experience. You know, you feel, I just can't get this. And you do it again and again and again and think, oh, I think it's getting better. It's getting better. You just do it again. And then one day you think, do you know, I've really got it. And that is such a powerful experience because it was worth the journey.
Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. Do you think that bigger voices are being excluded from Bach? I mean, I think about particularly some of the great German singers, Christa Ludwig, Hans Hotter. These were people who had, you know, a great understanding of how to sing Bach. Sometimes they scaled their voices back, sometimes they didn't. But I wonder if you feel that that's nowadays, that sort of voice is something that people aren't hearing. I don't know how many times Kaufman has sung the Evangelist, say, but, you know, I would be interesting to hear it, just to hear what you did with it, maybe.
It would, wouldn't it? And I think, you know, you've touched on taste, really. And I think taste changes with the ages. And it always has, and it always will. You know, there was a time, well, do you remember Lorraine Hunt Leverson singing Bach? You know, that was a very old-fashioned way, as we might have thought, of approaching the music. But it was full of, you know, heart and commitment, and in its own way lovely. But I suppose since the kind of early music reinvention of an approach to music of the 18th century, I think that has gone slightly out of fashion, that way of singing, where it's sort of full-blooded and full of sort of vibrato and so on. I suspect it'll come back again, and it's been very interesting watching this sort of crossover because, well, you and I have lived through it. When we were kids, all of this kind of early music thing was brand new, you know, with people playing crumhorns and all of that, making a filthy racket, and you just thought, oh no, surely that's not what music's about. But they, you know, that whole movement gradually got much, much better at understanding how to cope with the instruments, how to make music together. And at the same time, I think Bach, for instance, in a symphony orchestra would have been standard repertoire. But as the rise of the specialist groups came, so it totally fell out of the symphony orchestra's repertoire. And I think we're now seeing the kind of finishing of that journey, really. There's a lot of modern symphony orchestras now do play Bach, but they play Bach with half an ear to what the other guys have been doing. You know, they don't just play it all, as they might one day have done. And I think that's all to the good. we're listening to each other, and we're live music never ceases to be an experiment and a journey. And it's one of those things that in my job, I'm so lucky because I travel a lot, and you work with an American orchestra, you work with a Scandinavian orchestra, you work with a Russian orchestra. They're all different. And it's fascinating. What is it that makes these people play differently? And there's a danger with all our sort of international travel. Well, I suppose that's totally gone by the by just recently, but that it all becomes a bit sort of ironed out. But I don't think it will. And I think we learn from each other all the time and inspire our performance from what we hear other people doing. And I don't really like the idea that one should pigeonhole a performer or a composer in a way that you should say, oh, it's got to be done like this, or they only are any good for doing this. I think different people can do different things, and it's fascinating. And they bring a new light to it. Well, you've got me on one of my hobby horses here, but it's about singing song in other languages. Because, I remember talking to Florian Busch, a fantastic leader singer, and I really admire him, and he's a really interesting guy. And he's a very good linguist. He speaks really good French. He speaks excellent English. He's really, very good linguist. And he used to sing songs from all over the place. He used to sing English song, American song, Russian song, French song. And he says, oh, well, now I'm just going to sing song in German, because I think it's more important like that, because I can understand the real deep nuance of the language, because I've learned these poems when I was sitting on my mum's knee. I understand the technical, the kind of deep sort of folky nature of some of these poems. I totally agree with him. Of course he does. But when he sang an English song, he sang it like no Englishman would sing it. And I love that. It's totally different. And the danger with just saying, oh, I'm only going to sing German song, is that you become sort of ghettoized. And, English, it's like the dreaded term English tenor, one I hate, but I'm often described as such, that I sort of belong in a box, and heaven help me if I ever step outside it and do something else. I think we should step outside these boxes. And it's tricky. Would you ever say to a string quartet who happen to be Czech, you're only allowed to play Czech music?
Well,
I think a little
that is a good question. That is a very good question. And actually, it's quite interesting. I will reverse back to a couple of Bach questions in a second. But one of the things that a question I had to you was, what about singing things in English that are not written in English? Well, obviously, this is particularly pertinent to Bach. I have a personal dislike of Lieder sung in English. Now, it's a completely personal thing. I prefer to spend time with the text myself and work out what people are singing about, and etc. etc. But with Bach, I've done the Matthew Passion in both German and English. And the last time I did it in English, it was actually because I didn't want the 99% of the audience to be sitting around for 2.5 hours or so, literally not understanding a word. But there were still people, including people who would have actually struggled to sing the German, who were very much like, why are you doing this in English? So what about that then?
That's a fascinating question. And I've done the London Bach Choir's Matthew Passion quite often. Haven't we done that together? I can't remember. Yeah, and they have for 100 years or whatever have always done it in English, and they will not change. I'm not sure whether they won't, but anyway. Well, yeah, I think there's no question that there's something that connects the language and the music. There really is. If you think of Gerald Finzi writing his songs, he has such a nuanced understanding of how the cadence of the language works, and his knowledge of poetry is huge, and that kind of melds itself in the way he sets the music. And you will not recapture ever, I think, that kind of cadence and sonority of any language. by doing it in another language. I don't think you will. That being said, people have tried. They definitely have. And you mentioned Lieder. Roddy Williams has been doing, the Schubert cycles in English translation recently. And I think it's really interesting. It's interesting for so many reasons. It brings a sort of immediacy to the performance to an English-speaking audience that you miss. And it also perhaps allows you to recognize some of the sort of banality of some of the poems sometimes, that the poetry is simple, is kind of almost childlike at times. And when you get to know the German poetry, you recognize that. But if you're not over familiar with the poems, you might just hear this kind of exotic language and feel it's all very sort of highfalutin. And it isn't at all. It's very sort of normal, really. But I suppose these days, it is so easy to provide an audience with an up-to-the-minute understanding of what's going on. And I think we can experiment with this more and more. The Oxford Lieder Festival has been doing this with the idea of having kind of screens with the text beside the singer as they're performing, so that the audience is not having to look at a booklet or anything. It's there. Of course, it's not quite the same, but it really, really helps, I think. People have tried with surtitles and all the rest of it. And I suppose, yeah, the Passions is an interesting one, because that kind of, the way the story envelops unfolds, is critical, really. But I don't know. I suppose I worry that there's a slight danger of underestimating your audience if you say, "Oh, they can't possibly understand anything in another language." And I think
it's partly what you said before, which is if you don't have something that is out there for them to look at, you can often be that actually the audience looks down at the beginning. And barely looks up again. It's a bit like people sort of filming things on their phones rather than actually watching the thing in front of them. So I suppose that there's that as well. It is an interesting question.
And certainly I mention this to students when I'm teaching. I like to say, even if you think that the audience doesn't understand a word, literally, of what you're saying, I want them, from your body language and from the way you are portraying the text, to understand what's going on. They should be able to, even if the actual text is foreign to them.
Yeah. So a couple of little technical questions. When you're singing Bach, often there'll be, in the arias, there might be one word that lasts an extraordinarily long time.
Yeah.
And for you, what is it that you do in order to sort of keep that alive, to keep the sense of what you're saying alive when there's a lot of fluidity and technical difficulty that's coming into something you're doing for several bars?
That's a really good question. And I can honestly say I haven't really thought of it in such a detailed technical way, I don't think. I think in arias, the text tends to be repeated. Often it's a short text, and you say the same thing over and over again. And in some ways, it's a way of sort of embellishing what you say each time. You mentioned Bach. I think in some ways on the opera stage, say in Handel or other operatic composers, you get this even more and more and more. That the kind of sense of what you're saying stops, and there comes a moment where an opportunity to dazzle with kind of technical showing off, really. But I think in Bach he never does that, really, or very rarely, because the sense of the text, he's always setting sacred texts. Well, there's a few secular cantatas, but not many. And the sense that the text is deeply important, and it's not just a vehicle for somebody to show off. I think I suppose the answer to your question is I have no idea, but I think that the skill is in the composer, that if you can trust him, and sometimes the shapes of the actual phrases or notes are illustrative of what's going on. If it's all about weeping and being miserable, you'll find there's lots of descending phrases, and you can paint those as sort of weeping, miserable things. If it's a battle scene, there might be sort of arpeggiated figures which go dun, 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 again and again. And if you can imbue that with muscularity and vigor, that gives meaning to the line, which is not necessarily obvious in the notes, but you put the two things together, and it's what has to be there. And there are some tropes that he does with like, if you get the word stehen, he often, to stand, to be still, he often sets it on a long still note for ages and ages and ages. And also in the Passions, you quite typically get the word Jesus set with Jesus, ye being on a high note, just to emphasize his godliness. And these kind of rhetorical gestures that he uses, I think if one just sort of enters into them and allows rhetoric to become part of your performance, and to recognize that there's a rhetorical gesture within music, then I think you are looking beyond the text and the music.
So that sort of comes quite neatly then to, you must have sung, well, I don't know, you probably know how many evangelists you've sung of John and Matthew Kind, but it's a lot. Do you prefer singing the evangelists to sing the arias?
Much, but that's because I can sing it better. I find, particularly in the St. John Passion, I find the arias remarkably difficult. Ach mein Sinn is, I think you want, we were talking slightly about vocal types, but I think Ach mein Sinn demands quite a sort of heavy voice, ideally, that really sort of, wrenches your heart on those top A's. And then you have the other aria in the St. John Passion, the Erwäge, which sits for yonks and yonks and yonks on a top G, and it's tricky. I don't mind that one so much, but the truth is I prefer singing the evangelist, because I think it suits my technique and my musicianship better. Perhaps, and my sort of technical abilities are less, or inabilities are less profoundly on display. You're right, I've done an awful lot. I've done some fascinating performances. I've done some staged performances of it, of both of them, which has been quite interesting. I think the John works better than the Matthew stage, because there's more sort of dramatic sort of throughput. But nevertheless, I think they do both work, and it's interesting how that's the case. And it's the sign of a strong piece, isn't it, that you can butcher it in this way and it still holds its integrity.
So in that sense, how do you think your singing of the events has changed? And also, it must take, particularly singing the Matthew Passion, if you're doing it in rehearsal in the morning and then a performance in one in the afternoon, evening, that must take a lot of pacing, and then that must be something you need years to actually perfect. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think it does take ages to recognize that sort of stamina thing. But it's worth noticing, just doing the evangelist part, how well Bach has written it, because part one is significantly lower in tessitura than part two. It's just a note or two, but none of the really high notes come. And he just sort of warms you up rather nicely. And then, of course, you should, as tenor one, sing the aria Ich will bei meinem Jesu wachen, which just gives you a chance just to blow the cobwebs and really allow the voice to flow. You then get a break while you sit and listen to the boring sermon for an hour, and then you're into part two when it's later in the morning, and the pace of the thing picks up, and it's very well paced. Bach's put all of those really tricky moments just after the right amount of rest, so that you're ready for them. And of course, if you actually tot up the amount of time that the evangelist sings for, it's probably only, 20 minutes or something. I don't know. I've never actually totted it up, but it probably isn't all that much. You're not singing non-stop at all. You stop and listen to an aria. And that allows you just vocally to rest a little bit so that you're ready for the next one. And he's paced it so well. He really has it. I mean, the other thing that I notice with that, of course, is the pitch thing. Because if you do it with a modern orchestra, you're at high pitch, and it really is noticeably more tricky to get the stamina right. I must tell you a little sort of story. I won't mention the conductor's name, but I was doing the Matthew Passion with a total, well, not very nice man who was the conductor of a very famous orchestra. And I think I was there for 4 days before the first show. And the first day was kind of Monday, and he'd scheduled a rehearsal 7 till 10 in the evening, just continuo, and the solo singers. And I thought, great, we'll do all the recitatives. And we all arrived there, and we went through all the arias one by one. I didn't sing a note, and he just did them with the organ. And so I thought, oh, well, maybe we'll do them tomorrow. And the next day went, he did the arias, the next day went. And then we were on basically the day of the first gig. And I had not really rehearsed. And the poor cellist was tearing his hair out because he'd hardly ever played the piece before. And he really wanted to rehearse. And I was waiting. Bear in mind, this was at modern pitch. The first performance was, on the Friday evening. I got a call, please could you come in for 6 o'clock instead of for the 8 o'clock call for the concert? Okay, so I turned up at 6 o'clock. On the stage, there was the cellist and the organist. Right, let's start. Da Jesus diese Rede vollendet hatte. And off we began at the beginning. And we got to the end of number 2, and I just said, you're not expecting to go through it all, are you? And he said, yes, yes. I said, no, I've got to do the concert in an hour. I can't possibly do this. So we finished and basically did it for real. That's hopeless. Yeah, anyway, I must tell you another little story about a wonderful, Mark Padmore. I was doing a series, a sort of tour of the Matthew Passion. And we were doing it kind of 1 to a part. I was the tenor in choir 2, and he was the tenor in choir 1. So Mark had to do the evangelist, the tenor 1 arias, and all the tenor 1 chorus bits. I've done this myself, and it's quite tough. You can do it, but it's quite tough. And as I say, we were on tour, and we would do sort of 3 shows, and every now and again we'd have a day off. And the rest of us all thought, oh, this is great, and assumed it was nice because we were all a bit tired, having a day off. About sort of a week and a half into the tour, it suddenly dawned on me that Mark was doing these days off. He was going back to London to do the St. John Passion in the Colosseum on stage. That man's got, cords of steel. I don't know how.
Tungsten, right. So just a couple more questions. I would say, not just judging by the fact that when we did the John Passion, it was an intensely dramatic performance, but I would say you have a sort of slightly naturally dramatic bent anyway. Why not more opera?
Yeah, I do love doing opera, I must confess. But it's just not something I've ever got into. And it's, I don't know, it's partly having had a family. I think when I started singing professionally, it was more or less at the same time that we had our first baby. And you know what it's like with an opera. You're away for 3 months, 4 months. And that's not much fun, really. And whereas on the concert circuit, you can be away for a week, 2 weeks at the most. And that's much more sort of combinable with family life. But I think it's just something. I go back to, my being a fraud at the beginning. I never went to music college, so I never made the right connections. But I do the occasional opera, and I love it. I'm doing one next year, I hope, if it happens, in Madrid in the Teatro Real. We're doing Peter Grimes, and I'm the vicar. I love doing that. It's a great role. But yeah, I do absolutely love being on stage. It's great fun. I've no idea whether I'm any good, but it's been it's something I've always enjoyed doing. But it's interesting because a lot of my colleagues who do sort of wall-to-wall opera all look at me somewhat enviously and say, I wish I did a bit more concert work, a bit more recital work. And I look at them a bit enviously and said, I wish I did a bit more opera. So it's a bit, grass is always
what you don't have, what one doesn't have. So one final question before we just have a few questions maybe from the people who are here. What is it that you most like about your voice? And does it ever does it ever surprise you when you hear the noises that you make when you hear them? And have you ever not actually recognised yourself on the radio or something?
Gosh, that's quite a question. I mean, I think probably like many people, I find it quite difficult listening to my own, voice. We've all come across that with spoken voice. You think, oh God, is that me? How do I sound like that? And the actual, because when you listen to yourself in normal life, you hear yourself through your internal ears rather than that way, mostly. And it just sounds sort of different, doesn't it? And very different. I there are just, I find it difficult listening to recordings of myself. I immediately remember the sessions, and that's quite surprising because I've got a terrible memory. But listening to a recording, I'm always there in the sessions with all the anxieties and with all the sort of worries, and I can rarely sort of really let go and just enjoy the sound. And I think, if I'm absolutely honest, I prefer listening to other singers than I prefer listening to myself. I think. Have I ever not recognised myself? No, I don't think so. Have you?
Never recognised myself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never really thought about it, to be honest. That's the nice thing about asking the questions, I guess. Yes, and you neatly dodged the answering the question about what you actually like about your voice.
Yeah, I did dodge that. I can't answer that, David. I just I don't know. I've never been very very good at sort of, I don't know. I think there are times when I sense that the pacing of some things. I think sometimes I'm pleased with how I do that. I think to be sort of satisfied with oneself is a dangerous thing. You want always to want it to be a little bit better, and I think I would sooner take my lessons from other people, if you see what I mean. And in some ways, I say that to students too. I think you have to trust other people in this business, because that thing about what it sounds like to yourself is not what it sounds like to other people. And it's the same with performance. That's why singers continue to have lessons throughout their lives, because they're not reliable people for looking after themselves, I don't think. Singers especially, you need to keep trusting other people. It's one of those, working with conductors, it's a fascinating dialogue sometimes. And what I love is when a conductor sort of takes me at face value and says, that's fine, but have you thought of doing this? And immediately starts to try and turn the performance elsewhere. One thing I've never quite understood about turning up as a solo singer is when people sort of say, so what's your speed for this number? And I think, well, that's your job, isn't it? You're the conductor. I'll go at your speed. It's not for you to go at mine. I mean, there are slight sort of leeways, but I feel that the singer has a job to do, and can be molded by the conductor, by a good conductor. The conductor's job ought to be to get the best out of all of their musicians around them, to make them sort of find something to do that they never would have done on their own. And a kind of bowing and scraping towards a solo singer doesn't seem to me to be doing that at all. There, I've dodged your question again.
Excellent. Well, let's just see if that's given anyone else a chance to come up with any question of their own. But yeah, fascinating, really fascinating. Thank you. Is there a different type of singing that you would like to have had the opportunity to do? So I presume that means a non-classical. Have you ever had a sort of a desire to get your tight trousers on and go and be a rock god?
No, is the honest answer. But even within the world of classical singing, I think I'm gradually discovering where I fit. And it's something we talked about right at the beginning, is the kind of voice type. And I think voice type and kind of personality hopefully go together. They don't always. You find a very sort of, well, but I have a great love for earlier music, for Baroque music, and for Lieder. And actually, although I enjoy listening to a huge chunk of romantic music and big opera, I love listening to it. But to be honest, between you and me, I hate singing it because I just feel out of my comfort zone. And I haven't wished to be somebody else as a singer. No, I've enjoyed trying to find out where I feel comfortable. And you know, I remember talking to Stephen Varco about this. He said it's taken me all my sort of working life to realize that what I sing best is what I love best and where I feel most comfortable. And I should be happy with that and not constantly be striving to be something else. I think music colleges, sorry, I'm good at whittering on, aren't I, have a slight problem with this, that they kind of pigeonhole people as kind of early musicians, which is a kind of subset, literally a kind of proto-human, before you reach the golden being of being a kind of Verdian, or Puccinian tenor. And I don't know, I just feel that's a bit sad. I think people who can sing other stuff sing it beautifully, and that's for them. But I want to do what I want to do.
Which I think is probably one of the best lessons that any young singer could hear from you today. Is like, work out what you do well and carry on doing it, because it's got to be good for your voice as well, I would say.
I was just talking about Juan Diego Flores, who was on a radio interview, and somebody said to him, when are you going to move on to doing something else other than all this Donizetti that you do? And he said, well, actually, I think I do it quite well at the moment, and probably I won't be able to in a few years' time. So I'll stick with this, thanks very much. And he's quite right. He's good at doing that just now, and that suits his voice, and he does it fantastically. Why should you expect him to move on, to develop into something else? I don't get it, really.
Is there a concert role or piece that you've never sung that is on your bucket list?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The area that I'm doing more and more of at the moment is sort of more modern music, contemporary stuff, and I really enjoy working with composers. And I think that is a huge joy, actually. Well, I suppose the answer to the question is I haven't particularly got a bucket list piece at the moment, but one that I was desperate to sing a while ago was a piece that nobody does anymore. It was very famous in his day, but it's Schumann's Paradies und die Pairie. I don't know if any of you has come across that. It's an extraordinary piece because it's basically like a song cycle, but it's for massive orchestra, choir, and soloists and everything. But it's very sort of episodic, but it is totally beautiful. And I've always wanted to do, I remember doing a not very good performance of it years and years and years ago. And I thought, I really want to do some decent performances of this piece because I think it's excellent. And yes, I have managed to do that. So that was a big joy, actually.
What composer would you choose to listen to on a relaxing Friday evening?
Well, yeah, Mahler probably. I'm a bit of a Mahler nut, and I don't know why, but it's something about the way, particularly. Well, there's the symphonies, obviously, but his songs, with the symphonic settings of his songs, if you get a decent singer of those, it's just, that's where my heart lies, I think, as a listener.
So
Uh,
there's one of your parents is German, and is your mother German?
yeah, my mum is German. Yeah,
There's a lot of German music in your life.
yeah, I suppose there is really. That's just been how it is.
It's
I
funny,
don't
isn't
know
it?
why really.
If you were to do more opera, what operas and roles would be your top three? That seems a lot. Top one would be fine.
It's interesting. I mean, what opera have I done? I've done uh, sort of Gluck and Handel in the early scene, and then Britain almost exclusively in the modern scene. And I have thoroughly enjoyed doing those. I'm probably getting too old for it now, but I recorded Albert Herring a while ago, and I would love to do that. It would be great fun. I haven't got the voice for it, but I would love to do Peter Grimes. That would be, that would be a very interesting, because it's such a fascinating sort of a role to get involved with. Um, but I think one of the areas of music making that I have, certainly through my, performing life, that's really changed is how people have managed early opera, because I think particularly getting really interesting producers to make productions of Handel operas, Handel oratorios, and of voice operas, and some of that early Baroque opera, which I think if we were to do it in the mode which they did it in their day, I think it would be jolly difficult for us to stomach, because it was such a stylized way of production. On mise en scène was so sort of stylized. I remember reading about Handel, who used to get furious with his solo singers, because they would turn up with an aria from a totally other piece and say, I sing my aria now during the middle of the performance. And you think, how can this be? But nowadays, we have really amazing producers who are able to bring that kind of dramatic tension that exists in the piece, and that probably Handel never really sort of saw a performance in this way. And I love modern performances of some of these old operas, and I think I would love to try putting on stage one or two of those astonishing Handel operas that exist. I've done Jephthah and Theodora on stage, and I've thoroughly enjoyed doing both of those, and they both work as operas. They're such sort of dramatic stories. Be quite fun to do Belshazzar on, Handel's Belshazzar on stage. That's a great role to do, just in concert. But it demands a bit of theatre. It really does. When he sees the writing on the wall, you can't just stand there. The score, Handel's just written that Belshazzar goes, oh, and that's all that's written. You just get one note with oh underneath, and you can't just say the man's just been struck dumb by what he's seen on the wall, and I think it's marvelous. It would be great to do that.
Well, I tell you what, James, we'll get this tape out, and but I'm sure the invitation to sing it and put it on stage will come very, very quickly. Huge thanks. It's been great talking to you tonight. Really, really great.
David,
Fantastic.
so much for having me. I hope I haven't wittered on too much. It's been great fun, and I wish I could see everybody else, but I can't. But hello, everybody, and I hope to see you again soon when, God willing, this dreaded time when we're not allowed to perform together is over.
Fantastic. Thank you, James.
Okay, bye.